Hi everyone, welcome to our Mark's Gospel series and today to chapter 9. This chapter begins with an intriguing statement from Jesus saying that some of his disciples wouldn't taste death before they see the kingdom of God coming in power. Now, some in the early church understood this as referring to the remarkable progress of the gospel in the first days of the New Testament church as it turned the world upside down. The context, though, seems to imply that it refers to what happens next, the Transfiguration. This is a very significant and important event. Jesus is transfigured, his appearance is changed, and we glimpse him as the shining Lord of glory. We also see that he meets with Moses and Elijah, the archetypal lawgiver and prophet. And one of the ways of talking about the Old Testament scriptures was as the law and the prophets. And so here is a visual representation that all of the Old Testament points to Jesus. This event also speaks of Jesus' identity as the Son of God. On several occasions in the Old Testament, God appeared to his people on a mountain. He sometimes appeared in a cloud. There was also the shining of his glory. And what we see here with Jesus, therefore, echoes all of that. And of course, God speaks. "This is my Son," says the Father. While others may be struggling to see who Jesus is, the Father is in no doubt at all. And the Father also makes clear the implications of Jesus' identity. He says, "Listen to him." Now that, of course, is perfectly logical. If, as we are reading this account, we are convinced that Jesus is who Mark says he is, the Son of God, then the right thing to do, the sensible thing to do, is to listen to him, to give him and his words first place in our lives. Well, when Jesus, Peter, James and John come down from the mountain, they find a very different atmosphere. A man has brought his son to have Jesus drive out a demon from him. But the disciples, who have done such things previously, have failed to do it on this occasion. We later see that the disciples are far from where they should be. They're squabbling, and the implication of Jesus' words in verse 29 that this kind can only come out by prayer imply that they are not depending on God as they should. The man who came in faith has had his faith bruised by this encounter and asks Jesus to help if he can do anything. And Jesus pushes back on this in verse 23. "Everything is possible for him who believes," he says. The man is marvelously honest in his reply. "I do believe, help me overcome my unbelief." Now, many of us have found that they identify with this man. Our hearts are a mixture of faith and unbelief. But this man is a model for us in that he comes to Jesus with his questions, with the faith that he has, admitting his struggles, rather than waiting to somehow he's managed to sort himself out. Jesus, of course, heals the boy. We see in verses 30 to 32 that Jesus is very clear with his disciples about what's going to happen to him. This is him making clear that he's both the Messiah and the suffering servant of the Old Testament who will die. They can't understand any of this, and they're too afraid to ask. But what we should see is that Jesus is not stumbling into the crucifixion by accident. He knows exactly what lies ahead. The disciples, on the other hand, are thinking about themselves and are arguing about who is the greatest. Jesus teaches them that in his kingdom, a whole new set of values operates. It's a kingdom where greatness is about being a servant, where welcoming those who have nothing to give, like children in this context, is really welcoming Jesus, where sin is not to be placated or toyed with, but ruthlessly rooted out in one's own life. This is a chapter in which the disciples don't come out at all well, and we shouldn't miss the significance of that. Remember, this is one of the foundation documents of the early church. And sometimes people critically suggest that the early church just made up the stories about Jesus, or at least exaggerated them, in order to strengthen their case and their position. In other words, the Gospels can't be trusted. But of course, the church would never have made up stories in which its key leaders ended up looking so bad. The only explanation for these accounts is that this is what actually happened. Well, the trustworthiness of this gospel should surely lead us to read on and to listen to Jesus. So, read chapter 10. I'll see you tomorrow.